All right, here we are, Steve Palmer, lawyertalkpodcast.com. You can check us out at lawyertalkpodcast.com, where we have our backlog of episodes, etc. And those who have followed the show over the years know that every now and then I bring on a guest, another lawyer, another individual, a non-lawyer, whatever a non-lawyer is called in the world. But I've got a guest today, and I think it's going to be awesome because I get tons of questions. So one of the things I do is a series called DUI 360, and that gets all sorts of questions. Why? Because everybody wants to hear about DUIs. Not that everybody drinks and drives, but a lot of people drink and drive. And then I happen to make a connection with Maggie Stewart, an attorney out in California, and she's joining us today. Maggie, how you doing?
Very good, thanks. Thanks for having me on, Stephen.
I love it. Call me Steve, please. Steven,
Sure.
I just am not that important. But anyway, Maggie's got her own law firm called Mundial Law Firm. And I'm here in Ohio. She's in California. And we started to talk about this off the air, but I think you should explain Mundial and sort of the origin of it. And that'll sort of lead us into your biography.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So in 2016, when I started my firm as a solo firm, I was looking to get a website and a URL, and I couldn't get anything with Maggie or Stewart or Law combined. So I went with Mundial Law. Mundial means world in Spanish. I knew I was going to be doing immigration and helping people move around. So that felt like a good fit. And here we are.
I love it. I love like the little, it's not obvious, but it's there. It's perfect.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to call you the lawyer for the stars. I don't know if that's actually true, but it seems like you are probably.
Sometimes it is. Yeah. Oftentimes we're also the lawyer for like the set carpenters and the costume people and the lighting designers. So we're, for everybody. We work a lot with touring musicians who are going into Canada to perform, both on, the people on stage and the people backstage and the truck drivers and the bus drivers. Also some film and television work and kind of a smattering of other things that help people get where they need to be.
All right, so let's see if we can make a connection here. What does Lawyer Talk Podcast DUI 360, Mundial Law in California, and Canada have in common with celebrities and folks that you represent?
Absolutely. So one of the big issues for crossing the border into Canada is that Canada has very strict laws around what they call criminal inadmissibility. So they will stop you at the border if you have any criminal conviction history or even really a dodgy arrest history that you can't fully explain. Canadian immigration officers can see roughly what is on your FBI report. So they actually can see quite a lot. And increasingly, they see more and more because as each state digitizes their records, older and older things are getting onto FBI reports. So sometimes people will cross the border and say, I've never had a problem. And then they go back another time and they say, hey, what about this DUI conviction from 1997 in Ohio? You really can't predict what they're going to see. You can get your FBI report and know exactly what they're going to see. So the work that we do is to make sure that people who have convictions can get the waiver that they need to get over the border to play their shows. And then we also work with those same people and help them apply for what's called rehabilitation, which is a permanent resolution to that issue so that they don't have to hire us again. We like to put ourselves out of business with our clients when we can. Got
you. Well, I'm going to get back to the rehabilitation, but before I go there, because I do a ton of DUI defense. I do criminal defense of all sorts, everything from, multi-state federal conspiracy cases all the way down to a speeding case. And every time this comes up, in fact, I had this come up just a few weeks ago. I was working with a client who has business in Canada, and I had to have this conversation. I'm like, look, dude, I hate to tell you this, but if you get convicted of this DUI, you might have trouble getting in and out or getting into Canada. Now, I just hear tell of this. I've never experienced it myself, and I don't do any sort of immigration or work like that. In fact, I had to tell somebody recently, look, man, I don't do that kind of work. And this was after you and I talked, but I know somebody who does. So I'm going to start sending people your way. But
that would be great. We'd love to help them.
Everybody is shocked. Like, why in the hell does Canada care if I have a DUI? I mean, it just seems like it's insane.
So those are the rules Canada has, and they're not the only country that does. Australia, New Zealand, UK, United States, they all have variations on this. The thing is that most of them rely on you to self-identify. Right. So if you go to the UK, they give you a form. They say, have you ever been convicted? You could, I guess, choose no and hope that you don't have any issues with that. Canada can see your FBI report. Canada will know if you're lying. And they don't ask you, American citizens don't get asked in advance. They don't have to do anything to fly or drive into Canada. Most other people do. from other countries. They either need a visa or an ETA, but Americans can either fly or drive with no other paperwork. But if the immigration officer at the border so chooses to run your background a little deeper, they can pull up everything that's on your FBI report, and they will see that you have a DUI, whether it's from 2 years ago or from possibly 20 years ago.
And I can just see somebody saying, if you're asked by some Canadian guy, hey, do you have anything on your record? And you're thinking, no, I've never been in trouble. But then when you were 19, you had a DUI in some obscure county in Ohio or something.
Yeah.
I can just see that blowing up. And does it really happen? I mean, guys are turned around.
Absolutely. Yeah. And often if it's a more minor thing, they may say, go in, do your whatever, sort this out, don't come back without sorting this out. But if it's if things related to violence, weapons, bigger types of felony drug convictions, anything that falls into the category of serious criminality, which includes fraud, like credit card fraud, and since 2019 includes DUIs. So anything that's serious criminality, they have the authority to turn you around and tell you not to come back until you get a waiver or you get a rehabilitation order.
And is there? So I imagine you've got horror stories. What's the? I can understand how you get a tour bus and maybe an entertainer or a rock star or somebody. I mean, let's just say they're probably not immune from criminal convictions here or there. And I've represented plenty of them over the years.
The Venn diagram between people on that tour bus and people with convictions can be pretty high.
but leave that one aside. What about just like the average folks?
Regular people. Absolutely. Yeah. So we have stories, I had one client who his daughter had graduated from high school and they had planned a really nice hunting trip up in Canada. And they, and those trips are thousands and thousands of dollars.
I've paid for certain trips like that. It gets expensive.
He was in his 40s. Now, back when he was in his early 20s, this guy had a real addiction issue. And like so many people who struggle with addiction, he had probably 5 or 6 convictions, all of them relatively minor for just the dumb things you do when you're struggling with addiction: petty theft, drug possession, maybe some disorderly type stuff, like nothing really serious in the scheme of things. And all of it nearly 20 years old, right? But a list, 5, 6 convictions. He got to the border and they took a look at all of these convictions that he had in his record and they said, you're not coming in. And they turned him around.
He's in a car with his daughter?
He's in a car with his daughter, big trip, graduation trip, very exciting, up to celebrate her graduation and the whole thing.
And, I should just say this too, because, as attorneys, we sort of have this cutoff of time when stuff doesn't matter anymore. And usually 10 years is like the cutoff. So, and it doesn't mean if you got a felony conviction in our country that that'll linger for a long time and impact your employment and other things. But typically on day-to-day living, something 10 years old, especially a traffic case, nobody's going to even look at it.
And so traffic cases in the sense of like speeding, driving without, license, driving without proper insurance and registration, those are not going to be problematic at the border. But reckless driving, DUIs, hit and runs, anything that, falls into what Canada would consider a crime, that's going to get you. And it's true. Like where I get satisfaction in my work is that I agree. I don't think people should be paying a price this steep so many years later. I have a lot of empathy for my clients who come to me because they are not usually the person who committed that crime. We're getting people who are having to relive the worst day of their life, right? Whether it's the day that they were involved in a DUI or the day that they got in a fight at a bar. Most people don't have extensive criminal records, as you know, right? It's oftentimes somebody who, they just made a mistake one day, and a lot of times, I'll say it honestly, a lot of my clients did something I might have done, in the circumstances.
Right.
Yeah. And so, I'm really, it gives me a lot of pleasure to be able to help people move past this and get to do what they want to do, which in this case means traveling up to Canada, whether it's for work or for vacation or a family thing. But yeah, unfortunately, in most cases, the amount of time that has passed really doesn't matter. For Canada, if you have a crime that is not considered serious criminality, so that's older DUIs, minor drug possession, minor theft, smaller things, right? What might be considered like misdemeanors, but it doesn't exactly track that way. If you only have one conviction and it's been more than 10 years since you completed sentencing, so that includes all of your probation time, then you're what they call deemed rehabilitated, and they may let you through without a headache, but you'll probably get stopped and have to still explain yourself at the border. Just because that time has passed doesn't mean that they're not going to pull you over, doesn't mean they're not going to ask questions. So we, for example, frequently have clients who reach out and we say, look, let us give you some paperwork to take with you. Let's get your FBI report. Let's get your court records. Let's write an attorney opinion letter and explain why you should be deemed rehabilitated and let in, so that if they do stop you and they ask questions, you can hand over those papers and be ready to answer them thoroughly instead of having to go, oh my God, what was that thing?
Yeah, you've got facts. Which brings me to my next question, because I haven't crossed the Canadian border in a while, but I remember doing it as a kid or a teenager or maybe even in college, and it seemed like here's the scenario. There was 4 or 5 of us in a car, and we were going to party at Niagara. And it was on a whim. And I went to a small liberal arts college in the middle of Ohio. And we decided one day about 8 o'clock at night, we're going to drive to Niagara Falls. So we're doing it. And, I don't remember what time. It was late by the time we were crossing the border. And this guy, I can't say we were all doing innocent things in the car on the way up, but we were doing our thing. And the guy letting us through just says, all right, you're good, you're good, you're good. And looks at my buddy in the back. We still tell the story. He goes, what about you? Are you Mexican? And says that flat out, and he wasn't, but we're all just looking at this guy like, what are you talking about? And he laid into my buddy in the back seat, and we all got in, but it's sort of like he picked on one guy and made him answer a bunch of questions that the rest of us didn't have. So I'm telling that as a backdrop to this question. Does it matter who you encounter at the border? Do different border agents treat these things differently?
100%. And I do warn people about this all the time, which is you don't know who you're going to get, right? There are many, many, many border officers at the airports and at the border crossings. Some are really experienced, some are not. Some are good guys. Some are there to, wield power and power trip and make your life difficult. They are also, people who are, maybe racist, maybe sexist, may be prejudiced about whatever, because they're people. And, I've said, oftentimes, the buses that are crossing, they cross in the middle of the night. They sometimes cross at really rural crossings. If we have, a questionable situation, I will tell them, don't cross at night. Don't cross at the rural crossings where they, maybe have less experienced people with these situations. Go to the main border crossings. Go during the daytime when there's managers on site. Because here's the thing, officers only have a certain amount of power individually. They sometimes need their managers to sign off on things, whether that's policy or whether that just makes it easier for them to do it, right? They don't want to be personally responsible for that decision. If there's no manager on site, they may take the easy road out of just turning you around, right? So, we get into
it makes sense. Less paperwork, less pain in the ass.
Less paperwork. They don't have to be accountable for anything. They just turn you around. They don't have to explain their decision more than, I saw something on his FBI report, I turned them around. So we do counsel people depending on what their situation is on strategies around crossing the border. But again, like you said, you never know who you're going to get, right? It's really the luck of the draw, and like immigration stuff in Canada, same as in the United States, can be very subjective.
Well, I'm going to shift gears with you. I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to sort of come at you and give you a scenario, because this came up in my real life practice just in the last few weeks, or maybe a few months. Great. So it turns out there is an offense in the United States called disturbing wildlife parts from their natural state. Now, how would one find themselves crossways with this law? Well, if you happen to be hiking in like Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota, and you come upon a shed from an elk or a deer or something, meaning an antler, and you pick it up and you look at it, maybe you carry it, maybe you want to shove it in your backpack, maybe you don't. If a DNR agent happens to see that, you can be charged with this offense. And I had a client, in fact, charged with this offense. And as you might expect from somebody who is curious about antler sheds, this person is also a hunter. And Now, it turns out I was able to get this case resolved and dismissed and dealt with. It's only a misdemeanor. And for those who care, it had to go through some processing place in Texas and in the federal government. And then from there, we had to wait like 2 or 3 months. And then it finally got filed in federal court up in North Dakota. And eventually I was able to talk to the assistant United States attorney up there. And, we got the case resolved and dismissed. But, in the meantime, my client had a hunting trip planned in Canada. And
Right.
I think I'm guessing it was spring, maybe bear. I don't know. And he was all concerned. Like he said, do I have to worry about this? And I said, well, yes, you do have to worry about this. So I called a
Possibly.
friend
Yeah.
in Canada and said, what say you about this? And before I say what he said, I'm curious your thoughts on it.
So for Canada, the inadmissibility laws apply whether it's not if you have a conviction in your home country per se, it's whether the conviction you have would be a conviction under a federal law in Canada. So if, for example, there were in each province a similar law under a provincial, wildlife act, that would not trigger the immigration problem because it's a provincial law. If there is an analogous federal law, so whether that's under the criminal code or, a federal wildlife act, then we would have a problem, right? So federal laws in Canada include criminal code, drug-related laws, weapons-related laws, immigration-related laws, things like that. It doesn't include Motor Vehicle Act things. So again, you're driving with suspended license, driving with speeding, those kinds of things. So the first thing I would say is I need to research this because I don't know off the top of my head whether what he did and what he was convicted of in the United States would even trigger a federal law in Canada, right? So we look for that equivalence. If there's an equivalent federal law and he would have breached it in Canada, then he would be considered inadmissible, and then we'd have to talk about getting him a waiver to get in. But it's first looking at that equivalence, and I, off the top of my head, don't know because I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's such an obscure law, but it turns out there is something similar in Canada, and I got the same answer. Somebody did that work, and it was a friend of a friend, and it turns out that if this individual had been in fact convicted of this, it might have been a problem for his hunting trip that was upcoming. So,
Yeah.
But it's a great example to show you. I mean, and the reason this came up, I'm trying to think how it came up in my conversation with this guy. And it might have been because we got to talking about hunting trips because I'm a hunter. And I said, oh, be careful because this might screw up a Canada trip. And so then we started to dig into it. But it goes to show you how you can get caught flat-footed without even, like flat-footed without thinking about it. That's the point. How you can get caught flat-footed if you could, like your case, people lose their hunting trip or they lose their vacation.
It's real. I mean, exactly. I think, the thing is, if you've ever been fingerprinted, it's usually what I tell people. If you have ever been fingerprinted, go get your FBI report because it's not only people who have convictions and who are inadmissible that have problems at the border. Here's a scenario. You have a DUI charge from 2019 and you hire Steve and Steve does a great job and he gets it dismissed. No conviction. Oftentimes, FBI reports will show a charge and they do not show the dismissal.
That was my next question. What happens when that's the situation?
You have a real headache is what you have because you get to the border and they say, we see you got charged with a DUI a few years ago. What happened? And they said, my lawyer made that go away. And they said, can you prove it?
Yeah, and then you get crickets. So look, well, I finished a DUI case here in Ohio. Just the other day I finished one. Mm-hmm. I get a certified copy of the court's judgment entry showing what happened. And you probably have a portal now. We have these client portals. So I put it up in my portal. I share with the client, and theoretically they have it electronically. If they were to say, here's my phone, here's the entry that shows it was dismissed, is that going to be good enough?
I think that would probably be sufficient, as long as they can say, oh yeah, no, that charge, I hired a lawyer, he did a great job, we got it dismissed, here's a copy of the dismissal order. That should be sufficient. They just want to see something. Which is what we usually tell people if they call us, if it's been dismissed and you've got the paperwork, take the paperwork with you, right? Take the paperwork with you. Another issue that we smack up against frequently is that people think that they've had something expunged.
Oh, yeah.
And expunged is this term that lay people think means that it's gone away and never existed and I'm never going to have a problem again. And it really is state to state what expunged means and what it does. Here in California, we have an actual dismissal order, which reverses it. It reverses the plea of guilty and dismisses the charge. So that it's as if under California law, they had no conviction, right?
Okay.
So great, no conviction. Usually, and especially if that's in an older matter, Immigration Canada will respect that as being not a conviction.
But it still shows that there was a charge, because sometimes even being charged with something can be a problem.
It will still show, and oftentimes the dismissal doesn't show, or doesn't show quickly enough, right? So
not updated or whatever, yeah.
Not updated, right? But a lot of times, as you know, expunged may just mean sealed, right? It may just mean sealed. It may mean sealed from certain kinds of background checks. It may mean, it doesn't mean dismissed, right?
Yeah, Ohio has this. For the longest time, we only could seal records except for a few really, really obscure exceptions. And I used to tell people, sealing just means you're going to take this file, this book right here, this file, we're going to stick it in a safe, and we're going to lock this safe. Now, it doesn't mean that certain people don't have the combination. Lots of people can have that combination, and they can go in and look at it, but it's locked. Recently, we started expunging, which means, and ironically, the law said out loud, you can treat a sealed record as if it never happened, except people could see it. So then you look like a liar if you say it's never happened. But now we have expunged, which in theory, I tell people is like, if you're shredding the record, it's like it never existed ever, ever, ever. And we've only had this for the last year and a half. We'll see how it plays out in Ohio, but you're exactly right. All the states have a different definition of this. And the lay people, meaning the non-lawyers, and this is not a criticism. In fact, it's probably a compliment. Like, they're not bound by the ridiculous definitional structure that we have to live with. And expunge mean it didn't happen to them. And
it does.
And it should mean that.
It should, or, unfortunately, they may not have just had a proper explanation of what it does mean in their case. And yeah, to them, they're thinking it didn't happen. So we frequently have people who say, I can't believe this is showing up on my FBI report. I paid a lawyer a lot of money to expunge this, right? There it is, right? And it's still a conviction, and it's still a conviction for Canadian immigration purposes.
And I have not thought about this, but you make such a good point, is that we have access to our own FBI records if we ask for it, right?
Absolutely.
Well, it just seems like good, solid practice, whether you plan on going to Canada or going anywhere. It seems like a good idea just to have it.
$50, depending on, like $50 to $100. You can do it through an FBI channeler. On my website, we have links to like how to get your FBI report. And actually, because I think it's so important for people to have information, if people send me an FBI report, I will do a free 15-minute consult on what that says and what it means for your Canadian immigration situation.
Well, but before we wrap it up, I'm going to take some time you can explain to people how they find you and what they do.
Absolutely.
Because that sounds like a great service to provide for people. But I do want to talk about, I have to talk about it, right? Because every time I open the news feeds now, we're talking about Canada and Trump and tariffs and sort of this back and forth and back and forth. What do you predict? What do you think is this going to have any impact on normal folks just going to Canada for tourism or vice versa?
I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I think, the reality is that most Canadians really understand that what is happening with tariffs and posturing is not representative of what, most Americans would want. I think there's still, like, person to person, a very close relationship. I do think Canadians got very, they did get very patriotic and start a very strong Buy Canada campaign recently, and frankly, that was good to see. And I don't,
it's probably a good thing for Canada, right?
I think it was a good thing for Canada too. But Canada, has always welcomed American and other visitors to Canada. It's a great place to go on holiday. 30 cents off on the dollar for great to go. And I don't think there's going to be a time anytime soon that Americans won't be welcome as visitors, as people that they're doing business with, as visiting family members, attending universities. I can't see a time where average Americans won't be welcome in Canada. I think there will be possibly, stricter relationships around business transactions or around American investment into Canada, things like that, trade and tariff things. But I think day-to-day things are going to remain. And I think especially cultural exchange is going to remain. So all of the tours going into Canada, vice versa, arts coming into the United States. There's always been such an wonderful open border and wonderful cross-pollination of arts and culture between the two countries.
Yeah, and I think that'll continue. And I think a lot of this stuff is just political posturing that'll go nowhere. I mean, I sort of think that this is the kind of stuff that ends up better for both countries, perhaps economically, and everybody just explores and figures it out. And I suspect we will continue to be lifelong friends with Canada, both business and personal, as well as travel. In fact, I wrote down on my legal pad here, Canada equals our friends. It's like, yet it just seems like that, and that sort of spawned my question about why get so trivial about letting Americans into Canada when they're our friends, and it just seems like so menial.
Well, so I'll absolutely agree with you on this point, which is one, everyone is subject to the same law. So it's not just Americans. Americans have
I know, but we're so arrogant. We think everything's about us. So
it's true. Well, where Americans are treated differently is that Canada can't see arrest records in the UK or in France or in China. They rely on people.
This is my next question. Why does Canada have our FBI records?
FBI report. So they are, they are treated differently in the sense that Canada has access to information that they don't have for other countries. My issue with this set of laws is that the restriction applies to people regardless of whether they're coming up literally for 24 hours to play one show in Toronto, or if they're applying for a work permit that's going to let them come into Canada for 3 years, or a study permit that's going to let them come into Canada for 6 years to do a PhD program. The law is exactly the same, and the application process to get a waiver or to get rehabilitation is the same, whether they're coming for 24 hours or 4 or 5 years. And in my opinion, there really should be a much shortcut way for people that are coming in truly for temporary stays, in which they're not, I mean, the legal test, to get in the weeds, the legal test is this person a risk to Canada, right? And somebody who's coming up on a tour bus with a tour manager and an itinerary, and we're going to this place and playing this show and staying at this hotel, and we're going to be on the bus and off the bus and gone, they're not a risk to Canada, right?
Maybe quite the opposite. They're there to entertain in Canada.
Well, that's it. They don't want to cause any trouble. Getting arrested in Canada would be a massive headache for them. Right,
yeah.
Right.
Although didn't Keith Richards got arrested going into Canada, I think, years ago with heroin, but I might be wrong.
Possibly stopped on the way in. There's been a couple people who have, tour buses get searched, things happen. So, I do agree. I wish the law were more flexible, and I wish it was better suited for the purpose. It's a pretty big hammer sometimes. It's not a very sophisticated tool.
So let's reverse the field a little bit. What is it like for Canadians coming into the United States? Do they have any similar restrictions? Does the United States do any of this kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I have some clients who are Canadian clients who I'm licensed in California, but I don't do American immigration. I do have Canadian clients who reach out to me, and I help them work with their American immigration lawyers, because there are laws that prevent people who have more serious crimes. They wouldn't typically capture you for a DUI or a lower level drug possession, but I have clients who have more serious records, especially clients who have spent any kind of time in prison, who need a full equivalent waiver to come in, especially if they're coming in for an extended period on O1 visas, which allow them to come as performers for an extended period of time, or whether they're applying for permanent residence, things like that. So for sure, and now, if you're probably paying attention, people with very minor criminal convictions or even charges under the Laken Act now in the United States can be deported for very, very minor convictions. I'll give you actually one last example. This was a few years ago and not under this administration. I had a client who was a Mexican citizen, had come into the United States illegally. He crossed the border where he shouldn't have as a child. He got married, he had kids, he was, having a whole life. And they had applied to for a green card adjustment of status for dad, and it was in processing. And these things process for years and years and years and years sometimes. He was driving his daughter to school, rear-ended a car, minor fender bender, right? Exchanged information, said, I'm going to take my daughter to school a couple blocks away. I'll be right back, right? Went, came back. Police were already there. Police arrested him, charged him with what? fleeing the scene of an accident.
Oh yeah, hit skip. Yep.
Yeah. And that was enough to get him deported. That was it. He had a 10-year bar.
Interesting. Well, I mean,
when we talk about, are these laws exceptionally strict for Americans crossing into Canada? Yes, in some cases, and I would agree they are. Does America have, similarly strict laws around people who are not American citizens who get convictions? Yep.
Yep. So we got the same thing. Well, look, this has been awesome. There's lots more I could talk to you about because I do a lot of criminal defense work. We're not too far from Michigan, and Michigan's not too far from Canada. So
that's absolutely true.
It turns out there's a little bit of a drug trade that goes all up and down this part of the country, and we get some narcotics cases in sort of this cross jurisdiction sometimes. So one day we'll have a conversation about some of that. But for now, why don't you, I want to go through your biography a little bit. I know you're licensed both in California, the United States, and Canada. Are you from Canada initially? Or are you a Canadian citizen?
I'm a dual citizen. My mom is from Philadelphia. I was born in, go Eagles. I was born in.
I'm with you, man, 100%. Although I'm a Browns fan, it's sort of a sad thing.
There you go. I was born in Vancouver. I went to law school in Nova Scotia, which is on the East Coast. And then in 2016, my family moved down to Los Angeles, and we've been here for about almost 10 years now. Yeah,
and what a great idea for a practice area. I mean, you've really, they always say find your niche, and it seems so easy to say that, but then you've done it.
It's super fun. I worked in Canada while I was in law school and practicing law. I also worked in arts administration. And so I have a real fondness for performing arts. I understand a bit of that world and how they work. And so it's a really nice matchup of being able to continue to work to support artists and to support people who work in the cultural sector, to move arts and artists into Canada, and really to use my law degree to facilitate all that. And after practicing in Canada, I practiced in civil litigation and regulatory law, and it was very adversarial work, a lot of insurance defense and that kind of thing. And I'll tell you, it's really nice to be in a practice that's not adversarial. It's really just taking, here are the rules, and marshal all your evidence and give us a proposal, basically, right? Can we approve your proposal? And there's nobody, I'm not fighting with anyone. It's great.
I was just talking to a colleague of mine this morning. We got in early and we just had this same conversation. Everything we do is a fight. Everything we do is an argument with your client, with a judge, with this, with that. I mean, it's like, I don't want to say you argue with your clients a lot, but everything is some sort of controversy that has to be resolved. And we live with this certain, we being lawyers, and now I'm just sort of talking shop, I guess, but we live with this constant level of anxiety with that. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of us just are innately better able to deal with that than others. And maybe, there's certain people who just love the controversy. I don't like it. I can go live in that world, but it's exhausting for me. So I hear completely what you're saying, is that you found a practice area that is only helpful and not controversial.
It's great. It's solution oriented. It's still very creative a lot of times, trying to find the evidence, make the argument, sort it out, make it work on the client's schedule, whatever the creative solution has to be. I have a really great team working with me. I've got about 5 full and part-time employees and some contract attorneys working with me, and we're able to really provide timely service to our clients, because people call us and sometimes it's last minute, and we love to just jump in and be like, let's figure this out. Let's get this done for you. We have clients mostly in the United States, but around the world also. And it's really, it's been great. And I get exposed to all sorts of, new music and new films, and just, it's, as lawyering goes, I always say I have the best clients. I really have found a niche that works really well for me, and it's been lovely to build this practice out in the last decade.
So 2 more things. The first thing I want to ask you is, you're not, just confirm, you're not limited to folks in California. In other words, if I have a client in Ohio who has a DUI, my client can call you and say, Maggie, I got to go to Canada, please help.
Absolutely. Yeah, we work with clients all around the country and around the world. We get court records from all around the country. We help people get their state certificates everywhere. I told you, we got a great team, and they are dialed in. Yep.
And that's, so in our, again, and it's talking shop, in lawyer world, that's a lot unique actually, because I can't go practice law in California without a license. But you're not practicing law in Ohio. You're just helping somebody from Ohio get into Canada or do whatever they're looking to do. So so that's just to say, anybody listening to this can call you even if they're not in
Absolutely.
California?
Yeah, they can reach out anytime. We'd love to hear from you. We've just launched a new website. It's got lots of resources on it. It's got a great contact card situation, and then it's got information how to get your FBI report, and anything that you could ask. We're right in the process of uploading some. I said, let's create a fun stuff tab. So it's got like pictures of our office Christmas parties and shows that I've been invited to, and the podcasts that I've been guesting on lately, all sorts of stuff. Go check it out.
So the website again?
It's mundiallaw.com, which is MUNDIAL law, LAW.com.
All right. Well, with that, Maggie Stewart here with Lawyer Talk. Thanks a lot for showing up. This is great. I'm glad we connected.
It's been my pleasure. I'm so glad we connected.
And I will be sure to be sending all my people who have these problems, and I get plenty of them, your way. So, well, look, we'll get this thing posted. I hope it shows up on the fun stuff part of your page.
Absolutely, it will. It's been fun. See, that's why we have the fun stuff tab.
Yeah,
Steve, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.
All right, great. Lawyer Talk podcast, off the record, on the air with Maggie Stewart, at least until now. Hey, Steve Palmer here from Lawyer Talk. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Check us out, all our social media. Like, share, interact, ask your own questions. We're here for you.